Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome.
In our top story, the Biden administration is pressuring its allies not to condemn Iran on its rapidly progressing nuclear weapons program. In the past, President Biden has worked to appease the fanatic Islamic Republic by releasing sanctions which allowed the Ayatollah's regime access to billions of dollars. Now, the Wall Street Journal has reported that President Biden is pressuring America's allies not to rebuke Iran for its illegal nuclear program. Tehran is now in possession of a stockpile of near-weapons-grade uranium and is working on arming its current arsenal of advanced missiles with nuclear warheads. Rather than holding the world's largest state sponsor of terror accountable, Biden has asked Britain and France not to censure Iran at the upcoming International Atomic Energy Agency's board meeting in June. Washington has also requested that other European nations abstain from the vote, assuring them that America will abstain as well. This comes after the IAEA reported that Iran has increased its stockpile of highly enriched uranium over the last 3 months, and within days, it could have enough fissile material for 3 nuclear weapons.
The International Court of Justice has voted to demand that Israel immediately halt its military campaign against the last Hamas stronghold in Rafah. This egregious intervention comes after The Hague issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. The motion, proposed by the government of South Africa, demands that Israel immediately halt the military operation in Rafah. It also falsely accuses Israel of not doing enough to protect Palestinian civilians. In response, Israel's National Security Council and the Foreign Affairs Ministry released a statement saying the ICJ's charges of genocide are false, outrageous, and morally repugnant.
Iranian-backed Hamas terrorists in Gaza unleashed a barrage of rockets on central Israel from the terror stronghold of Rafah. The armed wing of the Al-Qassam Brigade claimed responsibility for bombarding Tel Aviv and the surrounding communities with long-range rockets. 2 people were slightly injured from falling shrapnel, and 1 home was damaged. Israel remains adamant that it must eradicate the Hamas terror group from Gaza and specifically Rafah, where the remaining Hamas leadership is hiding. These attacks prove that the terror group still poses a grave threat to the Jewish state and that it must be dealt with.
The Israel Defense Forces confirmed that it targeted several high-ranking Hamas leaders in a recent attack in Rafah. 2 Hamas terror commanders were eliminated in the precision airstrike on Tel Sultan in western Rafah. Hamas officials falsely accused Israel of targeting civilians. The IDF evacuated more than 1 million people from Rafah before the military action and erected a tent city to house those persons in until the operation to eliminate the Iranian-backed Hamas terror group is complete.
The Israeli Knesset has advanced a preliminary vote to designate the United Nations Relief and Works Agency a terrorist organization. UNRWA provides aid only to Palestinians and has allowed corruption to poison its ranks. In the aftermath of the October 7th attacks, Jerusalem proved that at least 12 UNRWA staffers were directly involved in the massacre of 1,200 people in southern Israel. Member of Knesset Yulia Malinovsky, who authored the bill, explained that about 10% of UNRWA's staff in the Gaza Strip are directly connected to terrorist organizations, and that 2 teachers from the organization kept Israeli hostages in their homes. She explained that 130 teachers praised the massacre in public, and 3,000 UNRWA teachers glorified the genocide online. She said the purpose of this bill is to declare UNRWA a terrorist organization for all intents and purposes, as well as order the termination of relations and cooperation between UNRWA and the State of Israel.
The IDF has carried out military exercises simulating a ground offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The 146th Division joined the 205th Reserve Armored Brigade to prepare for the possibility of a full-scale conflict with the Iranian-backed terror group deep inside Lebanese territory. Hezbollah has fired thousands of missiles on the Jewish state since October 7th, forcing the evacuation of tens of thousands of people from their homes in northern Israel. The Iranian-backed terror group is in possession of thousands of precision-guided rockets that pose a grave threat to the Jewish state, and it is only a matter of time until Israel has to neutralize this danger. According to IDF officials, the exercise simulated combat scenarios in the northern arena, the rapid deployment of forces on the ground, the functioning of the division brigade headquarters, and the readiness of forces for an attack.
Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has vowed to deport foreign anti-Israel protesters from U.S. soil. According to a report in the Washington Post, former President Trump recently told a group of donors that he would crush the violent pro-Palestinian protests that have taken college campuses by storm. He said that the anti-Semitic demonstrations are a radical revolution that must be defeated, and that if he is reelected, he will set this movement back by 30 years. Trump reportedly assured the crowd that he supports Israel's right to continue its war on terror. When questioned about the comments, the Trump campaign's national press secretary responded, saying when President Trump is back in the Oval Office, Israel will once again be protected, Iran will go back to being broke, terrorists will be hunted down, and the bloodshed will end.
2 gunmen opened fire on a Jewish girls' school in Toronto, Canada on the Jewish Sabbath. The Beit Hayamushka school sustained damage, but no one was injured in the attack. Ontario Premier Doug Ford called the incident a gross display of anti-Semitism and said it is beyond belief that anyone could be this hateful. The Jewish community of Canada is facing an unprecedented wave of anti-Semitism that is becoming more frequent and more violent.
Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley was in Israel last week, where she visited communities affected by the war with Hamas in Gaza. Haley was personally escorted by former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, to meet top officials and attend security briefings. Haley toured the devastation from October 7th, then held a press conference from the southern city of Sderot. She said that America must stand with Israel, and she praised former President Donald Trump for moving the American embassy to Jerusalem and for allowing her to defund UNRWA. Haley said that Israel is on the front lines fighting against the enemies of America in a war orchestrated by Iran, helped by Russian intelligence, and funded by China.
Most Israelis oppose the creation of a Palestinian state as part of a normalization accord with Saudi Arabia. The Jerusalem Center for Foreign Affairs has released the findings of its latest poll, which shows that 64% of Israelis oppose the creation of a Palestinian state. The United States has been working to broker a peace accord between Israel and Saudi Arabia and has made the issue of Palestinian statehood a critical obstacle. President Joe Biden believes that the establishment of a Palestinian state will be the solution to the conflict, but Jerusalem insists that it cannot allow an Arab terror state to be created within its borders.
Jews and Christians gathered in Jerusalem to celebrate the March of Life movement at their annual gala event. This Christian organization was founded by the descendants of Nazis who have repented for their fathers' sins and have chosen to stand with the Jewish people and the State of Israel. Several Holocaust survivors joined Jews and Christians at the event, which culminated with a performance of the play The Exodus 1947, which was performed by the great-grandchildren and grandchildren of Nazis. The following day, March of Life organized solidarity marches in 5 Israeli cities where hundreds of Christians demonstrated that the Jewish people are not alone.
Archaeologists excavating in Jerusalem's City of David have unearthed a gold ring that is more than 2,000 years old. The jewelry is adorned with a precious garnet stone and was discovered completely intact. It has been dated to the Hellenistic period, 300 years before the Common Era. This is just the latest artifact uncovered from the excavations at the Givati parking lot outside the old city walls. Archaeologists said discoveries like this are beginning to prove that Jerusalem was not a small hilltop city during this period, but rather demonstrate the city's strong economy and elite status at that time. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Avi Abelow. He is the voice of the Pulse of Israel. Avi, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Josh. It is a pleasure to be on the show with you.
Well, Avi, tell our viewers a little about what is the Pulse of Israel.
Sure, it is a daily video and podcast when I provide the inspiring, politically incorrect truth about what's going on in Israel and the Jewish people beyond the headlines. We know the headlines can't really trust. There's narrative, no matter where you're listening, where you're watching. So we go much deeper and giving the politically incorrect truth that others are not as comfortable being able to say.
Well, Avi, I wanted to have you on the show for a long time because we were at an event a few months ago, and you said something that really stuck with me. You said if October 7th happened in Judea and Samaria and not in Gaza, then the reaction would be completely different. Can you explain that?
The Arab Muslims in Gaza attacked Israelis who lived on the Gaza border. For those who are unfamiliar, a majority of those Israelis who live there are secular, politically left. And they live in areas that everyone around the world knows is undisputable land belonging to the Jewish state of Israel. So when they were attacked, and they were killed, and they were massacred, and they were raped, and they were beheaded and burned, etc., 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 all of Israel, the political right, the political left, religious, secular, everyone was up in arms. And it's because of that unification of the Jewish people after this horrendous massacre, the worst since the Holocaust, that there was such a unity of support for the war to then go in to Hamas and destroy Hamas and end this evil entity that we're up against. If that same event, the same infiltration, the same number of murdered, massacred, burnt, raped, etc., would have happened against Jewish settlers in Judea and Samaria, immediately the headline news in Israel and around the world would be, oh, it's our fault because we live in Judea and Samaria. And the way to prevent this is that we're not supposed to be living in Judea and Samaria. And there would not have been unified support for a military offensive to go after those same evil Arab, Muslim, what I call Islamo-Nazis, and end that evil against us.
How do you explain that, though? Because legally, Judea and Samaria is part of Israel. Politically, it's very popular. I guess 70% in latest polls say they support Judea and Samaria and the population there. Biblically, of course, I mean, it's Bethel, it's Hebron, it's Shiloh, it's all the altars of our faith. So why would that be more controversial than any other place in Israel?
Because, unfortunately, there is a thinking within a certain elite of Jewish society, Israeli society, that even though we have biblical rights, historic rights, legal rights, defensive rights to be living in Judea and Samaria, they still want us out of there. And they're always pushing for the two-state, what I call delusion. It's not a solution. It doesn't solve anything. It's a delusion, and always trying to bring about a diplomatic solution that will basically expel the Jews from our homes in Judea and Samaria. So anytime there are terror attacks against us, I'm a proud Jewish resettler, that's what I call myself, not a settler, a resettler in the Judean hills in Judea and Samaria. And whenever there are terror attacks against us, instead of garnering the sympathy of the establishment media and the elites, they all of a sudden go on the attack and blame it on us. Oh, it's because you live there. And because the October 7th massacre took place mostly against secular, non-religious, left-wing Israelis, now many Israelis in Israel understand they're not killing us because of where we live. They're killing us because of who we are, because we're Jews. They aren't asking right-wing, left-wing, religious settler, nothing. They're killing all of us equally. So that was a big open aha moment that many people today have woken up to realize, which they would not have woken up and realized if that same exact massacre would have taken place against us.
Two-state solution is dead. No one here in Israel thinks it's viable. The latest poll came out, 64% of Israelis would never accept a Palestinian state. That means over 80% of Jewish Israelis. So why are people still speaking about the two-state solution?
My answer is simple. There is an agenda by the powers of the world to weaken Israel. And there are those within the Israeli Jewish elite who go along with it, whether they're just naive or they also support us not being in Judea and Samaria. For many people, for many Jews who are not strongly connected to their Jewish identity, Judea and Samaria represents that we're here because of our Jewish identity. So if someone wants to just be Israeli, like a Frenchman is to France or a British person is to Britain, they don't want us to be in Judea and Samaria. This reminds them that we're really a Jewish people and we're different and we're separate from all the nations of the world. Not better, just different. I'm a God-believing person, believe in the Bible. God chose the Jewish people, chose the land of Israel, said, my people go to this land, belongs to us. Unfortunately, there are some Jews, a minority, and especially in Israel, who do not want to be associated with the proud Jewish spirit, a proud Jewish identity. They just want to be a nation like any other nations. And we're not a nation like any other nations. We're the Jewish people with a purpose to live in our ancestral homeland in order to make a difference for all of humanity by being proud Jews living here in our homeland, which includes Judea and Samaria, the true Bible Belt. The Bible took place in Judea and Samaria. So we're home again. We're not going anywhere, despite the fact that there are some people who don't want us to be living in Israel or even in Judea and Samaria.
Avi, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Josh, I have a simple message for them. Support the Jewish state of Israel. We are on the front line for the whole freedom-loving world. By us fighting our war today against Hamas and Iran and Qatar and the whole growing Islamic world, they're also coming out to get you. We're the front line. This Islamic Marxist revolution is out to get all of us. You have to support Israel in defending ourselves because we're the front line defending you. That's the message I would give everyone.
Avi, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
And now the truth from Zion.
In every conflict around the world, people experiencing turmoil and strife where they live are granted the opportunity to seek safety in foreign countries as refugees. Usually, nations open their doors, hearts, and bank accounts to help those who are affected by war. But when it comes to Gaza, the international community's response has been nothing short of shameful.
The world is cynically refusing to allow refugees in Gaza who want to leave to come to their countries. In every other conflict around the world, refugees are allowed to leave a war zone and seek a safe haven.
There are currently 108.4 million refugees from conflicts around the world who have been forcibly displaced from their homes, but they have been resettled in countries around the globe. However, Gazan refugees find themselves trapped in a cycle of despair. Even though Egypt shares a border with Gaza and currently hosts 9 million refugees from other global conflicts, they have closed their border and refused to take displaced Gazans into their territory, not even into the Sinai Peninsula, which is a large swath of desert land with mostly open space. Egypt's Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry called the suggestion totally unacceptable and committed to keeping its borders closed. And neighboring Jordan, whose population is 75% Palestinian and whose Queen Rania is herself a Palestinian, will not accept refugees from Gaza. Since 2015, Canada has rescued 44,620 Syrian refugees fleeing their war-torn country. But Canada has only approved 144 visas for Gazans. Why doesn't Canada take in Gazan refugees as it did Syrians? The African Union mandates that countries take in refugees, and yet not one African nation has spoken out in support of Gazan refugees. It's a double standard that must be challenged and rectified. While countries like Canada and Germany have opened their doors to hundreds of thousands of refugees from other conflicts, Gazans are left to fend for themselves. They are oppressed and controlled by Hamas, abandoned by their Arab neighbors, and ignored by the world. This cynical tactic is solely aimed at exerting international pressure on Israel to stop fighting Hamas if Gazans are not free to leave the terrorist-run enclave. However, Israel has made their military goal clear: to remove the Hamas terror regime. In the meantime, the civilians of Gaza want to escape the violence and suffering. Adding insult to injury, Hamas manipulates the suffering of Gazan refugees for their own twisted agenda. The international community sends aid intended for civilians, but instead, the mafia-like Hamas organization steals it and then puts it on sale throughout the country's outdoor markets at exorbitant prices. The only ones who lose are the Gazans themselves. They do not benefit from the aid being sent into the Strip from countries like France, the United States, and even Israel. Instead of caring for the well-being of the residents of Gaza, Hamas claims the welfare of civilians is the job of the United Nations. Hamas uses innocent civilians as human shields, intentionally putting their lives at risk in an effort to garner sympathy for themselves and condemnation of Israel. The more that Gazans suffer, the more sympathy the people of Gaza get. This helps Hamas garner international attention and support, which lines their pockets with cash from donor countries. Gazans have become refugees in their own homes, while Hamas leaders are filthy rich and live a life of luxury in Qatar and Turkey. Gazan refugees are not treated like other refugees around the world. They have their own organization. It's the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. This branch of the UN is actually infected with Hamas terrorists who perpetuate the plight of the average Gaza resident. The role of UNRWA is to support displaced Palestinians, but in its 74 years of existence, UNRWA has never managed to resettle even one refugee. And nothing has changed. During this conflict, the organization has not resettled any refugees. The United Nations estimates that there are about 5 million Palestinians with refugee status globally. The organization has enabled multiple generations of Palestinians to live off of free handouts, keeping them in tight quarters and robbing them of the opportunity to gain independence. It's time for the world to recognize the hypocrisy and injustice being inflicted upon Gazan refugees. They deserve the same compassion and support afforded to refugees from other conflicts. Those who wish to keep Gazans stuck in Gaza are not pro-Palestinian. They are simply anti-Israel. Up next, the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Today we're excited to be in Migdal HaEmek in the north of Israel, and what we're going to see today is the opening of a new home that's going to be assisting people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. The ICEJ has been privileged to help with the establishment of this beautiful home, and we're here to bless it as the people begin to come.
I will tell you just a bit about this house, and first of all, thank you very much for your generous donation and help us to open that place. It was needed before the war, and it was started to establish before the war, and the war is coming, and now the needs is like here, really. We have 3 psychologists with different fields, like most about the trauma, most about EMDR, stuff like that. We have amazing crew of instructors that living here 24/7 and making all the non-formal relationship treatment, which is how to find the balance again, how to find the safe place again.
Since 1980, the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem has been a voice of Christian support for Israel and connected the global church to the land of the Bible. Headquartered in Jerusalem, the ICEJ has taken action to stand with Israel by caring for Holocaust survivors, helping Jewish families return home to Israel, providing bomb shelters, fighting anti-Semitism around the world, and by inviting Christians to discover Israel for themselves.
First of all, we are extremely privileged to be here today. Your nation deserves to live in peace and security. And
Amen.
we hope soon houses like that will not be needed anymore. But right now we do everything to enable this Israel, this nation, to return back to normality as soon as possible. And we want to do the best what we can to help in that.
Amen.
It's a privilege for us.
Mazal tov. So we opened this house less than a month ago. We have an agreement with Ministry of Defense, and we see many people came from that field, from post-traumatic syndromes. Sometimes it's from recent time, from that war, and sometimes it's from different wars. That war is just resonated and brings it back to life sometimes. We see people in high level of anxiety. Something starts going wrong. They start having some post-traumatic symptoms. Psychoeducation is also part of it, to normalize it, to normalize what's happening, and to build the progress together, to explain how we treat with that, how we treat with post-trauma syndrome, and helps them to believe that they have the force to pass it. I feel blessed, and to know the Christian embassy, and to be able to see how many amazing things you're doing around the world. I feel that you are solid ground in a very shaky time for Israel in general. For me as Israeli citizens, for me as a Jewish, you are very solid ground for us. And I want to thank you a lot.
After Hamas brutally attacked Israel on October the 7th, 2023, the ICEJ has been actively standing with Israel and her people through advocacy and urgently needed aid projects. Now is the time for Christians to turn their love for Israel and the Jewish people into real action as never before. Your donation will help deliver bomb shelters to at-risk areas, provide necessary supplies for first responders, care for evacuees with food, shelter, clothing, and trauma care, and will eventually help rebuild these devastated communities. Visit ICEJUSA.tv to donate online or call 1-800-910-6355 and give your generous gift today.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.